work you're doing out there on YBI and TI?
Sure, I'll start and then Will can go and then he'll bring up the show. Will's going to drive tonight. We're going to co-present. We're going to go back and forth. My name's Peter Brastow, and I have been associated with the Yerba Buena chapter since the 1990s. So it gives me a lot of warms my heart to see that slideshow at the beginning with all the events and happenings. And then thanks for dwelling on that at the beginning. It's really just incredible to see what a thriving chapter Yerba Buena is right now. So yeah, thrilled to be here. This is also my 30-year anniversary of working on restoration and stewardship in San Francisco. Got my start out of the Presidio and the GGNRA. I founded Nature in the City in 2005, and now I've been working for the city government at the Environment Department since 2012. A lot of what I do is I wear a kind of citywide policy hat in a way, convene what we call the Biodiversity Interagency Working Group. So getting us all within the different city agencies to work together to operationalize biodiversity as part of what we do on a daily basis. And we'll be working together really a lot in the coming months on updating the Climate Act, the 2020 Climate Act, 2021 Climate Action Plan for 2025. So you'll hear about that when we get into reaching out to the community around that. And finally, relevant to tonight, I get to still be a restoration ecologist out on Yerba Buena Island. So you'll see all about that via our slideshow tonight. But I've been doing that since I think about 2015. And I do that via what we call an interdepartmental work order. So the Treasure Island Development Authority, or TIDA, they give our department money just through transferring it from one department to another, so that I can support them as an ecologist out there and get to work with all of our colleagues, including Will. And I'll pass it to Will.
Hi, everybody. My name is Will Benge. I'm a landscape architect, work at a firm called CMG Landscape Architecture, based here in San Francisco. We are a mission-driven practice in that we select and do a lot of our work, based on our mission, which is to improve and increase social and ecological well-being through artful design. We focus most of our work here in the Bay Area because we really feel like we know, this community and this region. And so most of our work is focused here in the Bay Area. We have done a little bit of work in Southern California and the Pacific Northwest as well. We work on a variety of scales. We have done, especially recently, a fair amount of resiliency planning, coastal resiliency planning, site design for college campuses, school campuses, building and designing large parks, just kind of the full gamut of parks and open spaces and all of the outdoor spaces that we all know and love, with a focus really on the public realm, which is what we really like to design for. I've been working on Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island myself for about 5 years. Our firm has been working on it for a little over 20 years now, since it was master planned in the early 2000s. So yeah, excited to share some of this work with you today, and the kind of partnership me and Peter have kind of grown over the last few years. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we can get started. All right. Everybody can see that?
I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll hand it off to you, Peter, to get us started.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we've introduced ourselves. So we've done that part, and this is an image of a site that we're going to highlight in the second half of the presentation. But we really wanted to, just kind of give you a really integrated sense of the work that's going on out there in terms of the land and the people and the partners, and the design and the ecology and everything. So we'll dive right in. We'll just go to the next slide. So this is obviously Yerba Buena Island from the air, kind of from the southeast. and Treasure Island, and it just gives you a sense of how it sits in the bay relative to the rest of the geography of the bay. You can see Mount Tamalpais in the background there in Marin County, and Angel Island there as well in the bay. Yerba Buena Island is about a fifth of the size of Angel Island, so quite a bit smaller. But Yerba Buena Island, I'd say, is maybe the second or third of the largest kind of natural hilly islands in the bay, after Angel Island, and then also Belvedere Island there behind Angel Island, next to Tiburon. You can see Alcatraz, and then Treasure Island. Treasure Island by area is actually bigger than Yerba Buena Island, and you're going to see a bunch of slides about the building of Treasure Island coming up. And so it's also fun to just show the island in the context of the city as a whole. So many of you are familiar with the nature in the city map, of course, and so the dark green on the map are our natural areas, our restored areas, those remnants of the ancient natural environment. And so when you see Yerba Buena Island there, you can see we have some of that as well on Yerba Buena Island. The scale is kind of hard to see it, but you can see some dark green there. And so Yerba Buena Island is, really related and part and parcel of the ecology of San Francisco, but it is, offshore, so to speak, kind of halfway between San Francisco and Oakland, and so it does have its own unique ecology. All the plants that grow on Yerba Buena Island just about grow in San Francisco, with the exception of one, which you'll hear more about. But yeah, so it's definitely part of the San Francisco ecology. I found this slide recently. Mostly all the images are mine or Will's in this slideshow, but this one I've pulled off the internet, so you can see the credit there, so I won't get in trouble. But this is a very typical fog pattern, as you can see from above, the fog going through the Golden Gate. But I really liked it because it shows what is often happening with the fog being on the west side of the city and not on the east side, which includes Yerba Buena Island. So Yerba Buena Island really has a climate that's more like downtown in Oakland, as compared to the west side of the city. So it's really outside of the main, very mesic fog belt, where when you're on the west side of the city, especially when you're in some of the plantations and the water's just dripping down in the summertime. And so that determines the pattern of the plant communities, of course, in Yerba Buena Island.
And so I'm gonna
yeah.
share just a little bit of history, just because both of these islands, as some of you might know, have a super rich history behind them. Yerba Buena Island, as Peter mentioned, is the natural island, and so it goes way back and has a history of humans inhabiting and utilizing it for centuries. It was used by indigenous peoples as a fishing outpost, way back, again, centuries ago. And then Treasure Island was actually man-made, as Peter mentioned. It was built on an existing shoal. They basically built a big rock dike around this whole thing and then just pumped bay mud into it to make this big, large, flat expanse on that existing Yerba Buena shoal fill. And that was done for the Golden Gate International Exposition. So this was a big exposition in 1939, showcasing the latest in arts and architecture, garden, science, and of course many other things. So they built this man-made island, and essentially built a whole city out there for this exposition. It's honestly super interesting. There's a ton of history, and they actually have a museum in Building 1. So if y'all come out there for the tour, I think we'll start there, and we can kind of walk through some of the history there that is again super interesting. After the exposition, it was intended to be used as an airport, actually, and it was going to be used mainly as a takeoff, and I think it was used for a few years as a takeoff and landing zone for seaplanes in Clipper Cove, which is this cove just to the northeast of Yerba Buena Island and to the south of Treasure Island, kind of a man-made cove after they developed Treasure Island. And then, of course, shortly after the exposition, World War II came about. The U.S. entered the war, and both of these islands were quickly made into naval training facilities and bases. And it remained that way into the 80s. This is an aerial photo of both islands about, I think, 15 or 20 years ago before the development project began. And I think it was decommissioned as a naval base sometime in the 80s, and the land was slowly started to transfer from the Navy into the city. And so fast forward, you can go between these two slides and see what this transformation is really going to entail. This is the full build out master plan for the development of both of the islands, which CMG again has been a part of since the beginning. We have been the master landscape architect on this development and helped to kind of guide the master plan and a lot of the big landscape moves that you're seeing on this master plan. This was approved back in 2011 and construction started back in 2015. So we've been in construction for, I guess, about 8 or 9 years now. When the project is complete, it's going to include 8,000 homes, 27% of which will be affordable housing. And the project also includes over 300 acres of parks and open space, which is really, I think, one of the more exciting parts. That it's really going to be a bunch of new neighborhoods for the city, a new community for the city, but it's also going to be a regional park destination. There's a large ecological park on the north end of the island. There's an agricultural park in the center, a large sports park. Yerba Buena Island, which we're going to focus on today, is mostly about habitat restoration and management. And then there's a series of neighborhood parks and waterfront parks on Treasure Island as well. Just to give a little context, obviously this isn't all happening at once. It's a phased project. Currently, we are in phase 1, which is this pink area, which includes a couple blocks here on Treasure Island and then a large swath of Yerba Buena Island, which is again what we're going to kind of focus on today in our presentation.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Will. I think just a slight correction there. I think that the Navy, a lot of the decommissioning of the bases around the bay happened in the 90s, starting in the early 90s. And then I think the Navy started transferring more like 20 years ago. So it was
Okay, a little later than the
relatively
80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a kind of a funny image from the habitat management plan, which we'll be talking about. Actually, Will be talking about in a little bit. But I'm going to kind of walk you through just some of the ecology of the island. Show you some pretty pictures, and so you can get familiar with what's going on out there. But this is just kind of some snapshots of some of the wildlife and plants that are out there. And this image is, like I said, from the management plan. But we can now scroll through everything we've got here. So this is a nice shot this is a more recent photograph, maybe from this year or last year, that I took. So you can see the tower that's being built out there. So this is looking north down into Clipper Cove and out to Treasure Island from Yerba Buena Island. So you can kind of see the mixed oak woodland and eucalyptus still on the right there, and that's California bee plant in the foreground there on the lower left. And there's definitely some wild ryegrass in this photograph, and so lots of native plants, plenty of invasive weeds, but you can, this gives you a good idea of the mixed environment out there. And then this is our wonderful coast live oak woodland. That's Treasure Island Road, which currently is under construction, incidentally. So when you drive out to the island now, instead of getting off to the left like you did for decades, you now get off on the right side while they rebuild Treasure Island Road. But this oak woodland is on the west side, of course, of the road overlooking downtown, and is really one of our best natural areas on the whole island. So we're really proud of the fact and happy that we still have it and that it remains despite, all the disturbance, over the years. And so we spend a lot of time taking care of that. You'll see some photos. And then, so we're just going to go through a bunch of shots. This is just a nice, kind of gives you a sense of Clipper Cove, again, kind of from the east side of Yerba Buena Island, looking toward Mount Tamalpais. This is the causeway, newly reconstructed, so that connects the two islands, the Yerba Buena and Treasure. And this is actually native Clarkia that was part of the seed mix that was hydroseeded out onto the causeway. And this is down on the west, way down near the water, as you can see, on the western bluffs. So pretty close to that shot of the oak woodland, kind of down below the oak woodland there. This, of course, is our native bluff lettuce, Dudleya farinosa, looking over downtown. And then this is in the interior of the oak woodland, as you can see. This is a fiesta flower, with not in flower, but just looking beautiful and lush. This is probably in early March before it starts to flower, and just thick underneath that oak woodland. I gave a presentation at our integrated pest management technical advisory committee meeting last week, and I talked all about our invasive plant management, and I did have a focus on this area. So you can ask me about this on the walk, or contact me and I can tell you more about everything we've been doing to restore this woodland. And then this is the fiesta flower in bloom, just a beautiful little purple flower. It's actually a vine, and you can see the poison oak there. We have a lot of poison oak on Yerba Buena Island in Stanley, so I'd like to give a little ode to poison oak. It's beautiful. People don't like it, of course, but it's a beautiful plant, important wildlife habitat and resource. And I think we can go to the next slide, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why fiesta flower is so special, which is that it does not occur in San Francisco County except on Yerba Buena Island. Although last week I was corrected by one of the Rec and Park natural resource specialists, who seems to have found that on Bayview Hill, in a very remote location where he surmises it has not been seeded. And so it actually might also be a remnant location, the only one left on the peninsula in the city. But what we've been saying up until last week is that Yerba Buena Island is the only remaining San Francisco County population. And actually, we have quite a few stands of it, because as a vine, it just seems to grow no problem. As long as you don't devastate it and do a lot of disturbance with the weeds and the oxalis and the arharta and everything else, it still does fine. So we have over a dozen stands of it throughout the island. And so it's actually doing pretty well. And the other really cool thing is you can see that we're literally at the northern tip of the range of the fiesta flower species. So it ranges all the way down to Baja, which Coast Live Oak does as well, incidentally. But Coast Live Oak goes further north, whereas the fiesta flower stops right here at Yerba Buena Island and supposedly Angel Island. The Marin Flora lists it as being in Marin County and on Angel Island. But if you go to iNaturalist, you won't find any observations of fiesta flower in Angel Island. So although I did go on there and I found an outlier up in Lake County, which seems to be legit. So definitely finding out some interesting things as I've delved more into the fiesta flower story. But this is the gist of it. We're at the northern tip of the range. And I think if you keep going, I think we have, this is just another shot of the fiesta flower and our western bluffs. Again, kind of the oak woodland is up to the left there. And you can just keep going. And then this is a nice shot looking north from the oak woodlands. They kind of jut out in sort of a little mini peninsula to the west. And then as you go north, the shoreline kind of wraps back to the east and then heads north. And so this is all of the Western Bay Bluffs. And so you're mostly seeing native vegetation here, with the exception of the eucalyptus up above. So there's oak in here, willow, and native shrubs. There's definitely some French broom invaded in this area and some fennel. But mostly what you're seeing is native vegetation. So the Western Bay Bluffs are reasonably intact. We do have our weed problems, but we're working on those. So really cool landscape. This is down on the beach. So we have one little kind of ephemeral coastal strand habitat, or foredune, and sort of salt marshy, because it has not only the marsh gum plant. This plant's been here as long as I've been going out to Yerba Buena Island, so 20 years. It's the same plant. It just, I don't know, hangs on. It's incredible, and it doesn't propagate along the beach. It just stays right there. This one plant. It's getting bigger. We also have saltgrass, so Disticulus spicata, jalmea, fleshy jalmea carnosa. We have some ryegrass growing out there on the beach, and then what am I missing? Missing something, but anyway, it's beach burr, Ambrosia chamasonis. So a small flora, but a unique one in terms of this is the only location where we have that community on the island. And then this is California polypody fern. This is actually just above the new eastbound ramps. So it doesn't look like this now, of course, because it's it's this time of year, summertime. But I also wanted to show this photograph, not only because it's kind of cool looking, but also to say, hey, we have actually 6 native species of ferns on the island. We have the California polypody, we have goldback fern, wood fern, sword fern, bracken fern. I think we have lady fern, and we also have something called coffee fern, which is an unusual fern in that it doesn't grow in moisture places. It actually grows on the southwest and south facing slopes in the kind of ancient sand. So that's a really cool little element floristically of Yerba Buena Island. So you can keep going. And then, so speaking of weeds, this is just kind of a cool shot to show the problem. You can see all the eucalyptus, of course. And then at the low elevation, right above the water, all along the cliffs around the island, we have this plant called Canary Island Marguerite, which I had never even seen before I started working out on Yerba Buena Island. And it really is a scourge along the cliffs here. You can see how thick it is all along there with the white flowers. And so it's in the bluff lettuce, the Dudley habitat. So it definitely has taken away a lot of space from the Dudley and other, and seaside daisy and other species that can grow, in the steep bluffs there above the water. But and it's invasive, and it rises up the hills. And so the approach that we're taking is we're managing it to the edge of the cliff basically, and then eventually, we'll get eradicating it off these cliffs, but that's going to be quite a project, as you can imagine. And we've got our hands full with all the rest of the island. So we're just for now basically kind of creating a containment line, if you will, where it's occurring at these locations on the island and not letting it, go above the cliffs. So that's been successful.
I'll just add to this, Peter. This photo was taken at low tide, I think, during one of our bio blitzes, and I haven't checked the tides during our tour next week, but if people have the opportunity to get out there at low tide, it's an excellent experience to go in that cove and see, and you can get a lot farther along the cove edge at low tide.
Yep, it's beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to run through a bunch more images of our flora and fauna. So we do have one CNPS rare plant. So if you're familiar with the California Native Plant Society Rare Plant Inventory, I think there's like 3,000 species on there, maybe 2,400, something like that. I think it's in the 2000s, statewide. So it's a huge list of rare and endangered plants. We have, I think, 17 in San Francisco County, one of which is the Coscilia. So it's the only one that occurs on Yerba Buena Island. It's among what we call our kind of dune annual, our suite of dune annuals. So the federally listed endangered San Francisco Lysingea, the Coscilia, and the San Francisco spineflower are the 3 rare plants in that suite of annuals that grow in the dunes. So we have monarch butterflies. We don't get a lot right now anymore. But we do get them still coming through. This one is nectaring on blue dix lily, which is thriving on Yerba Buena Island. You can go to the next slide. This is actually Long Treasure Island Road. This is all actually disturbed right now, but I'll give a shout out to Bob Hall and other members of the chapter with whom I partnered, and they came out and they actually harvested tons of the blue dix bulbs before they went out and started doing the construction on Treasure Island Road. So we were able to rescue a bunch of those, but they come out in profusion when we have lots of good rains. And you can see the next slide. I think that shows that. Yeah, this is looking down toward the Western Bay Bluffs from Treasure Island Road. This was last year. So, whatever, April or May of 2023, when we had a lot of rain and they just went bananas. So Blue Dix loves Yerba Buena Island. And we have the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. So we used to have 3 locations of the Dutchman's pipevine, or Aristolohia californica. One of those unfortunately got eradicated in the development, but we still have 2 left. One which also got impacted, but the plant is still there. But then we have a pretty significant population on the east side, kind of above that shot that I showed you of the ferns, totally growing within the eucalyptus plantation, like it's doing fine in there. And so as a result, we also get the butterfly, and that's the larva. And then here's the butterfly itself, again, nectaring on blue dix lily, having grown up from being a young one, eating the pipevine leaves. And then during the first BioBlitz that we did for the island in 2017, we found lots of cool things, including apparently, according to folks from the Academy of Sciences, what may be a new Aureliolomax, a banana slug to science. There's a supposition or a theory that the banana slugs on the Bay Islands are actually a different species. So this is yet to be confirmed. It's going to take some work, obviously, but that's pretty amazing if it turns out to be true. We have both alligator lizards and western fence lizards on the island. We also discovered that for the first time during the first BioBlitz. This is pretty cool because this one's in a coast live oak hanging out. So western fence lizard. A couple times I've seen leopard sharks wash up onto the rocky shore. So you can see them, as well as incidentally the rays, the bat rays. You can sometimes see them if you're up on the island. You can look down and see them underneath the water. And then we have an amazing haul out of harbor seals on the south side of the island, so on the Coast Guard side. And you can see them pretty much throughout the year, but they're concentrated in the springtime when they're resting out there and pupping. And then this is a striped shore crab, but also highlighting the fact that our colleagues, our marine ecologist colleagues from the Academy of Sciences came out. TIDA paid them to do a really thorough intertidal and kind of nearshore survey of all the life out there around the island, and really came out with a really cool report showing some really interesting things. For instance, a huge contrast between the life on the west side of the island, so the side that faces the city, and then on the Yerba Buena Cove, excuse me, the Clipper Cove side. And so, and of course, you know, hundreds of species of flora, fauna, and fungi, but some really neat finds, some invasive species, but nothing totally out of control, luckily. A couple of like first time finds for the Bay. So really interesting stuff. So, and the report is uploaded on TIDA's website. So if you Google around, you might be able to find it, but you can also find it if you can find your way to TIDA's website. So we have a few seaside daisy populations left, still hanging on despite like massive disturbance of road building and everything else. So some of our natives are so resilient. I wanted to just highlight our 4 native tree species besides the willows. But we have, of course, coast live oak, California buckeye, and blue elderberry and toyon. And you'll hear more about some of those as we go through the presentation, probably. But highlighting the California buckeye, because the neat thing, one of the things I love about Yerba Buena Island is it's one of the few places where we actually have the opportunity to try to restore an actual buckeye woodland habitat type. We have buckeyes in the city, of course, but to my knowledge, with the exception of the big one at 22nd in Pennsylvania, and maybe a couple of other singulars here and there, there's no place where we have like a grove of naturally occurring buckeyes left in the city. They're all, you know, planted, including like the one on the main post of the Presidio, right? There's one on Lobos Creek, but there's just one. Whereas we have 2 or 3 groves of buckeyes that remain on Yerba Buena Island. And this is at the site, which we're going to focus on. You're going to hear a lot more from Will. But I'll just tell you now that this whole entire site, the McCalla Stormwater Garden, was designed around saving this buckeye grove and highlighting it. So you're going to see much more about that. Okay, so this is kind of a funny slide that I showed Will that I encountered when I was putting my show together for last week's presentation. And it really kind of demonstrates the patchwork quilt that is all of the players that are involved on what's going on in Yerba Buena Island. So as I said, San Francisco Environment is who I work for. I work with TIDA, the Treasure Island Development Authority, who manage the islands. The roadway there was the responsibility of the County Transportation Authority. So in the process of them rebuilding those ramps, they were responsible for revegetating this whole area. They did it with a pallet of California native plants, not local natives, though they've actually been pretty successful given all of the weed management that we've marshaled to make sure it all survives. So you can see in this photograph some point raised ceanothus kind of in the middle of the shot there, and then coyote bush, not from local provenance. There's, Salvia clevelandii, which is from Southern California. There's like a cultivar of our sticky monkey flower. So definitely like a California native plant palette. And then the swath here where the erosion control is where a utility line went through, and that's where we actually brought in some native plants, some local native plants, excuse me, from Literacy and Environmental Justice, who did all the growing of those. And so that's part of the patchwork. And then up above, you can see the existing coast live oak grove, which is something, again, that we're restoring and managing around. And then to the left of that is a hydroseed that was part of that was another part of the landscape there. And then right down below in the lower right, next to the road, was another disturbance that was as a result of just the development process. And so that was hydroseeded with yet a different palette of species. And then of course the vertical development up above. So it just kind of like paints this picture of like what a complex situation this is out on Yerba Buena Island. Oh, and so speaking of all the players, this is where I'm transition to Will, but I'll just reinforce all the city agencies. So Environment, Treasure Island Development Authority, I mentioned the CTA, of course, Public Works and the PUC are out there as well. And then we work really closely with Rubicon Landscape Group, which has been out on the islands for many years. And then Habitat Potential, led by Josiah Clark, who some of you may have heard of. And then I persuaded the developer about 9 or 10 years ago to hire LEDGE, or Literacy for Environmental Justice, represented by that rectangular icon at the bottom, to be the grower of all the native plants for the infrastructure development. And we're gonna focus on one of those sites today, and I'll turn it over to Will here.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head about the complexity here. As you can see, there's a lot of different players, a lot of different stakeholders, obviously, varied interest here. So I feel like a lot of the success behind the work is really working with all these different people and all their different needs and, what's driving them. And, that I think Peter and I have done a pretty good job of wrangling all those and pointing them in the right direction towards hopefully restoring this island in the best way possible. So as Peter mentioned earlier, we have a habitat management plan. This was developed in 2011 with CMG and WRA, and the YBI Habitat Management Plan essentially serves as kind of the guiding document for open space development and restoration efforts on the island. It's about 100 pages, so we're just going to show you some of the highlights here. But it provides a really detailed analysis of the pre-development ecosystems, all the ecosystems that were out there before the development started, as well as a prescriptive management and restoration strategies for the various areas on the island. So this is a map of all of the pre-development ecosystems again. And as you can see, so there was a lot of those, a majority of them are eucalyptus woodland or ruderal landscapes, mostly filled with invasive species planted throughout the years by the Navy as they built out their housing and their training facilities out here. However, you can see that there were some pockets, particularly around the coast. I think Peter noted a few of them in his slides, of relatively intact native ecosystems, which is exciting and something to build upon. So as a part of this management plan, the island was developed and broken down into these various management zones. And then each zone was scored with attributes and threats, which determined an overall management strategy for each area. And so as we've been implementing this over the years, we have some more large scale project sites, which we're going to talk about one of them today. And then there's also a more ongoing kind of rigorous stewardship effort, which Peter is going to talk a little bit about, kind of the more ongoing day-to-day management of these areas that's kind of backed by this habitat management plan.
Great, yeah, and so thanks, Will. I I kind of just developed this idea last week for the presentation that I gave at the Integrated Pest Management Technical Advisory Committee to encapsulate kind of how I think about land management on the islands and in general, to be honest, but as it's applied specifically to the islands. And so as you've learned and as you probably mostly known, we have a natural island, Yerba Buena Island, and then we have the artificial island, Treasure Island. But as we go forward, we really want to imagine and manage the islands as a single coherent ecosystem. So we're doing that right now to a degree. As the development unfolds on Treasure Island, or before it sort of marches north, as you saw in Will's slide, we actually have installed a lot of several different demo gardens on Treasure Island, where we're bringing the native plant diversity from Yerba Buena Island to places that are much more accessible to the community. So we're hoping that the community is benefiting from that and learning a little bit about the nature of Yerba Buena Island, and again trying to knit the two together. And so obviously another really important tenet is just securing and conserving and restoring all of our native plant areas. So we'll just show the image of the kind of color-coded native ecosystems that remain. So those are our highest priority, of course. And so we are taking care of those to the best of our ability, as I described a little bit, and then managing the priority weeds, not just in the natural areas, but across the whole landscape. So in our new parks, in the built environment, and so I was really talking about this a lot last week, of course, because my presentation was all about weed management. But Ehrharta erecta, for example, we can't just manage it in the natural areas and then mow it down in the built environment. We need to really manage it appropriately throughout the island so that it's not a vector from the built environment into the natural environment. We use herbicides very judiciously and as a last resort. I know there are some of us conservationists who think we should use them a lot more because we've effed things up so badly, as Jake Sig would say, that we can't help but use herbicides for a lot of our needs. But we've decided for now that we're not using it for yellow oxalis, for example, but we do actually spray Bermuda grass when we have big patches of it that we want to tackle and get rid of. And then of course we use it to paint stumps of eucalyptus or acacia, et cetera, that we cut. And so then not only we're restoring the natural areas as you do with local native plants, but also the built areas. And then of course, and so one example of kind of accepting natural regeneration is that within the that site that I showed you, kind of the patchwork quilt. So where the CTA built the westbound ramps and did I mean acreage, many acres of this revegetation with California natives. We're managing that, and we want to maintain that landscape that they created because they are holding the slope pretty well. But at the same time, we're letting all of our local natives come in. So we have bee plant and coyote bush from the island itself, and morning glory and wild rye and lots of other local natives that just come in on their own. So that landscape is going to evolve over time into sort of this funny mix of our local natives and our California natives. Okay. And so this is actually that slope where I showed the image earlier. And this is Rubicon Landscape and Habitat Potential working together to help fill in this utility corridor after it was ready to be revegetated. And if you go there now, it's actually pretty well vegetated. This was about 3 years ago, I think. And this is the Yerba Buena chapter, including Eddie and Noreen, whom you've already seen tonight. And Jake Sig there on the lower right. So, and Bob Hall, who I mentioned earlier, in the green hat there. This is the Oak Woodland site where we've been working ever since I started working with TIDA out there. We actually got a $40,000 grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to get rid of all the Ehrharta. There was a total Ehrharta understory at the Oak Woodland, and we did use herbicide then. We did two. We used a group called oh God, the name is leaving my brain at the moment, but we did 2 treatments of 0.25% glyphosate. And then that's it. We've never used herbicide out there again. It's all on hands-on stewardship to stay on top of that investment. And so I had kind of a break in our contractors being out there and doing the work. And so I called up the Yerba Buena chapter out of desperation and said, come on, can you guys come out and give me a hand and pull weeds? And it, of course, was a great day and we had a great time. And they played a really important role. And then I think I got a couple more shots. This is Noreen and Eddie. Oh my God, I forget her name. I'm sorry. They're out on the tip of the island, overlooking downtown.
Go Whitney.
Whitney, right?
Yes,
Yeah, Whitney, thank you.
fabulous volunteer.
Yeah, I've heard she's a great volunteer. Yeah. And so, and that's a pile of Australian fireweed, which has turned out to be a really bad weed out there. And actually, we did have a fire there. So not only did we disturb the place by doing the herbicide treatment and then all the work managing the Arharta over the years, starting in 2015, I think, we then had a fire in 2020 that burned a good amount of this area. So it's been a real animal, real tiger by the tail, as Jake Sig likes to say. So thanks again to the Yerba Buena chapter for coming and helping out to keep it going along. And that's just a nice shot of us afterwards. Okay, this is another slope on the east side of the island. So this is actually just across the road above the slope where you're looking down, looking at Rubicon and habitat potential working together. Just kind of behind us to the left, there's the oak woodland that I showed in the other photograph. So there's an oak woodland, there's blue elderberry, there's about 20 other native plant species on this slope. So really important to manage that, the Bradley method, find your core habitat area and work out from that. And so this whole lower slope was covered in acacia, blackwood acacia. And so this is Julian tree subcontracted by Rubicon to remove all of that acacia. And then we painted the stumps, and that took 2 or 3 years to finally get rid of it. And now, of course, we're following up on other weeds such as velvet grass. But really important to get all that acacia out of there. That biomass was just massive, so that we could get in there and steward it for the long term. And then, okay, this is going to be a sequence of photos. This is on the east side of the island. So you can kind of see behind the eucalyptus trees there, a couple of what we call our Great Whites, the Senior Officers Historic District. We've seen some photos that are kind of on the other side of this. Look at the one, just the previous photo. But this is kind of the corner. If you basically came down and you were going to the Coast Guard, so your back would be heading down to the Coast Guard base if you've been to this part of the island before. So this is getting toward the extreme eastern end of the island. And this was just a corner. This whole section on both sides of the road where you can see the truck parked up there was actually also full of acacia. We got rid of all the acacia. We cut down just a few eucalyptus, not all of them. And then on the far left of this photograph, the eucalyptus that you can see there is actually no longer there because it came down last year, a huge euc, massive, just because of all the saturation of the soil. So this area is transformed. And so for this corner, we did what we call a demo garden. So I mentioned all the demo gardens on Treasure Island, but we've also got a couple on Yerba Buena Island. So you can go to the next slide and you can see that we went out there and we sheet mulched it, but some yellow oxala still came up. And so Rubicon went out there with the steamer. Again, we didn't use herbicide, but they used the hot steam, and that works really well. Works it seems even better than torching, than a propane torch. Okay, next slide. And then we planted it with the diversity of natives, again grown by Literacy for Environmental Justice at their Candlestick Nursery. And so this is this might be year 1. Maybe might be year 2, but I think it could be year 1. You can see Chamiso's lupin and Seaside Daisy. And then this is the following year, and it's just filling in, looking great. You can still see the mulch and the eucalyptus leaves falling down. And then this is this year, totally filled in, closed canopy, coastal scrub, landscape. Toyon there on the right, some ceanothus on the upper right there, growing really, really strongly. And then in the background, the local native wild rye that was already at the site, thriving. So just, yeah, really looking beautiful. This is summertime, so it's not super green, but in the kind of middle of the photo, that's Phacelia distans in seed. So yeah, just a wonderful landscape that we were able to create there just by trying to stay on top of the weeds and putting in a few natives. So this is the plant palette that I created kind of out of the flora of the island. So thanks to Mike Wood, who we haven't mentioned yet, but he was subcontracted with CMG to create the habitat management plan. And so he started back in 1996 working for the Navy, creating a plant list of the island. And so then he did that again in 2010 and 11. And so then out of that flora, I created a flora in an Excel spreadsheet. And then from that, I created this planting palette, which is a subset of the plants that are in the flora for the island. And so this has been kind of our guiding document for what we're planting in all the sites, including the one that we're going to highlight today. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. And so then these are some images from Ledge's nursery, from Literacy for Environmental Justice's nursery in Candlestick, one of several native plant nurseries in the city. As you know, CNPS Yerba Buena chapter grows a bunch of plants themselves in people's backyards. Nature in the City grows plants, Sutro Stewards, of course, Bay Natives, Mission Blue Nursery down in San Bruno Mountain. So there's lots of native plant nurseries in the city, but this is one of the bigger ones in terms of capacity. They've just doubled their capacity. So really great, sophisticated nursery, on par with Watershed Nursery in Richmond in terms of being a private sector nursery that's producing all local native plants. So this is really important for the rest of the show because they're the ones who supplied the plants for the site that you're going to learn more about from Will. I think you're up after this, right, Will?
Yes. All right, I'm going to take us home here. So we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the more specific projects that are, well, we'll talk about one specifically, but in this diagram here, you can see the project sites that have been or are being implemented as part of the development plan. It includes 4 parks, a trail system, and then 2 stormwater gardens, one on the east side, the Willow Bridge Stormwater Garden, and one on the west side. Those 2 stormwater gardens basically drain and treat all of the stormwater falling on the new streets and homes. One of them drains everything on the east side, which kind of is in this area here, and then the other one drains the west side. And so again, we're going to focus today on the Buckeye Grove Stormwater Garden, which drains the west side of the island. This is about a 3-acre site, which is located on the northwest facing slope. One of the amazing things I think about the foresight of master planning in this development is that we're able to do the stormwater treatment at scale. Typically, for those of you who have been around in the city, urban stormwater treatment, you'll see these kind of small street planters treating small drainage areas along the roadway or small development footprints like a single building. But in this scenario, we're actually able to treat a very large area all in one centralized location, which obviously necessitates a bigger site and has a bigger impact from an ecological standpoint and from a public access standpoint as well. Essentially, we can create a stormwater garden that can be a park and also a habitat area as well. So I think it's really unique from that standpoint. And I have to give a little shout out to the folks in the stormwater division at SFPUC who also really helped to guide and create this kind of unique approach to stormwater management. So this is our site, again, on the northwest slope of the island. As you can see, it's got these sweeping views over the bay and, looking over towards Treasure Island. This is a site which is doing multiple things at once. It's first, about water quality, treating stormwater before it's sent out into the bay and then later into our oceans. And then second, it's about ecological restoration, increasing biodiversity on the island and restoring habitat on this site. And then lastly, but not least, it's about people and nature, bringing people into this space to see both the stormwater treatment, the infrastructure, but also to be surrounded by a biodiverse urban and native landscape. So you can see the design is a series of terrace basins. There are 4 basins on this side and then a small 5th one across the street over here. And so these are the stormwater treatment areas. The whole site was graded, again, as Peter mentioned and showed the photo earlier, around a grove of buckeyes here. So that whole area was preserved, and then the whole site was regraded to incorporate all of these stormwater treatment areas. So here,
I'll say, if I may,
go ahead.
Will, actually, that whole site was mostly eucalyptus plantation.
Right.
So we haven't removed much eucalyptus for just purely ecological restoration. It's been for all the other reasons, including the building of the stormwater garden. There was actually a fiesta flower stand there as well. We'll bring it back, of course, and as I mentioned, we've got it all over the island. But yeah, the total transformation of the site from a eucalyptus plantation with a small buckeye grove to what it is today.
Yep, that's a good thing to highlight. Thanks, Peter. So here's a site plan that kind of shows the stormwater system again. The stormwater comes into each basin through the four-bay structure. So each one of these has a four-bay structure that you see in here, and you can see the pipes that bring it in from the streets and the homes kind of there in blue. It goes into that four-bay structure and then gets dispersed into these basins where it's brought down through the soil media. It's soaked up by the plants before it hits an underdrain system. So it's essentially treated before it goes back into a pipe and into an outfall and out into the bay and into the ocean. So in this photo, you can see, this was after it was all built out and planted and grown in. You can see the four-bay structure here in the bottom left, just to give you an idea of the scale and kind of what that structure looks like. It's got a series of cobbles and gabion walls in there because the water comes out of that pipe at a pretty high velocity. So those kind of break the velocity of the water before it gets dispersed out into the treatment area here. Here is the system active, and I think one of those 2022 or 2023 big storms we had when the water was really flowing out. You can see it coming out of the pipe before it gets dispersed out into that basin there. And so this diagram shows the plant communities that we focused on within the design. Again, really focusing on biodiversity across this site. We have pockets of woodland communities mixed with coastal scrub communities, and then in the stormwater basins, since they're being inundated with water more regularly, especially in the rainy system, it's more of an emergent wetland type community. And then this slide, it's probably a little bit small and hard to read, but just goes to show the various planting palettes included in those communities. We planted in total over 70 trees, all oaks but mostly buckeyes, and over 25,000 plants representing over 40 different species. So again, a lot of biodiversity across this site. All of those plants again grown by Ledge in their nursery they set up on the island from primarily seeds and cuttings that they took from the island. So we had a lot of local genetic stock in there too, which was a really cool facet to the project. So when we went to install this, we had to show the landscape contractor where to put all of these different species of plants and how to actually lay them out in these different communities. So this diagram is something we put together to give them an idea of where to place everything. And then of course we went out and kind of checked things and kind of moved things around after they had gotten an initial layout gone in there. I always thought this transition was kind of interesting because you get to see kind of the layout of the plants and then how that kind of played out across the site after everything started to grow in. And then again, there's a social function of the garden. There's a people component, how people experience and interact with the space. And this shows the two pathways that go through the garden. One of them is a bike path, and one of them is a pedestrian walk. The bike path, I think, is really nice for people commuting from the ferry up to their homes on YBI instead of having to climb slowly up this road. They can kind of take these nice switchbacks up through the stormwater garden and experience the garden and also have a little bit less of a climb on their hands. So again, yeah, this is a primary route from the ferry terminal. So it's a space that residents and visitors walk and or bike through on a daily basis, giving them an opportunity to really experience the sort of ephemeral qualities of the garden as it changes through the seasons and through the years. The site again is pretty magnificent in that it's perched on a hillside with sweeping views over the bay and the city's eastern skyline. We have a couple little informal seating areas scattered throughout the sites. These are eucalyptus stumps that we salvaged when we took down a lot of the big eucalyptus trees. We have a series of little furnishings we've made out of those that are going to be incorporated into the park system. So we've got some little seating stumps throughout the site as well. This is a shot from the bottom that I thought might be interesting for people to get a feel just of the sloping nature of the site and how those switchbacks kind of work their way up the garden. And so again, when we were installing the planting, we came up with a system of colored flags to lay out all of the species throughout the site. This was probably one of my favorite weeks of work, where I spent probably a couple of solid full days out here reviewing and then rearranging all of the colored flags as needed to make sure all the plants were going in all the right places across a pretty large site. Here you can see, this is kind of interesting to see the buckeyes. This was in the winter, or I think in the early winter, late fall. So no leaves on the buckeyes, but it shows how we kind of graded a lot of this slope around those pretty glorious buckeyes that have been there for quite a long time. So this is a shot of the planting shortly after install. The majority of the plants were installed as plugs with their long and mighty root balls, but just these little tufts of vegetation on top. And at this point, we were often getting asked, whoa, hey, when is this thing really going to grow in and be a garden? You know, it was kind of this field of mulch at the beginning. But it quickly, you know, as I'm sure a lot of you can attest to, just giving the plants some time, and these plants really took off in short order. This was about a month or two after planting. This was 2 or 3 months, you know, starting to really get some growth, and it helped that they were all planted in a pretty wet winter, and then we quickly went into the growing season and had them really take off. This was 6 months after planting, where things were really starting to fill in, and the garden was really coming to life. And this was maybe a year and a half or 2 years after planting. So this was when things had kind of filled into its full potential, which was really exciting to see. You know, again, all the diversity throughout this garden. You know, since then, we've also taken countless school groups. We're going to do a tour out there with this group next week. It's really been a showcase project. We brought in public agencies out there, garden clubs, all types of groups to really kind of showcase how we can implement ecological restoration within these infrastructure projects, which I think is a really unique part of what we've done out here. But again, as I'm sure many of you know, and Peter sort of hinted at in his slides, that you know, installing a lot of these plant communities is the easy part. Maintaining them is really the key to their success in the long run. So for the first few years, we've had a really rigorous and ongoing maintenance regime dealing with all types of invasive species, a lot of the usual suspects, as you would imagine. This is a yellow oxalis, which is a problem throughout the island and has cropped up in the stormwater garden as well.
I'll just say that it didn't crop up technically, Will, because this is actually underneath the drip line of the Buckeye Grove, and so since that area more or less remained undisturbed, like the ground didn't get turned up and over, this was actually a kind of an extant
Yeah,
stand, if you will, of the yellow oxalis. So
right.
yeah, this shows that we obviously weren't on top of it enough whenever that was last year, there before, but just shows, yeah, that as Will said, we got to stay on top of the maintenance.
And similarly with the eucalyptus recruitment, again, you know, we removed a lot of them, so some of them are saplings that come up out of stumps. I think these are all just seeds that blew in. You know, there's all
Yeah,
these
those are seedlings.
existing groves on either side of it, so those are blowing in, and we're having to constantly watch out for more eucalyptus coming in.
Yeah, I pulled about a half dozen when I was out there this week.
There you go. Yeah, I see many and do the same thing. Um, And so, yeah, before we finish here, I thought I'd show a few photos. You know, we did this one, the one I showed you and walked through on the west side of the island, but we also have another stormwater garden here on the east side of the island, which I think is It's unique in its location, you know, right under the east span of the Bay Bridge, which is just this huge piece of infrastructure, and you're sitting under that adjacent to these historic officers' quarters. It's just a really kind of unique and interesting space. This site is a little bit more of a flat site, obviously. So the stormwater conveyance system is a little different. There's a channel that moves throughout the site and actually distributes it into all the various basins. But a lot of the general restoration and planting palettes are all kind of fairly similar. Just a few more photos. You know, through that site, you can see those historic officers' quarters behind the site there, and then all of those new ramps, these kind of huge, massive infrastructure moves are kind of an interesting kind of contrast to the work we're doing, and then the historic housing there. This is a photo during one of those massive storms where we had the whole thing flooded, and it drained it all just fine and is really operating and functioning quite well. And this is final slide. I'll hand it off to
Great.
Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So we wanted to just finish so I could highlight this effort that CNPS is part of, and TIDA is part of, and San Francisco Environment is part of. So for those of you who maybe haven't heard of this yet, it's called Reimagining San Francisco, and it's really an exciting new potential collective impact effort spearheaded by the California Academy of Sciences at the end of 2022. And so now we're about 44 organizations strong. I am actually representing environment on the steering committee. We actually had a meeting this afternoon. And, you know, really it's about trying to create more collective power and energy around our twin goals of increasing biodiversity and biodiverse habitats in San Francisco, and bringing biodiversity into the built environment, and providing an opportunity for everybody to connect to nature where they live. Just, you know, complementary with San Francisco Children in Nature program, every child, every day experiencing nature. So that's Reimagining San Francisco. You can check it out on, I think it's reimaginingsf.org. And as I said, many of our city land management agencies are part of it. We are as well, the planning department, the National Park Service, Presidio Trust, and a lot of our local nonprofits that you're familiar with, including the Yerba Buena chapter, the Exploratorium, etc. And so we're really excited about this, the potential for this, and we're finally getting some projects going. We're talking about some of our projects today, and then, you know, it takes a lot to get a collective impact organization organized and able to do things, because there's a lot of people to coordinate and bring together. But once you create that system, we're really optimistic that we can, you know, raise some good amount of funds to really, you know, take it to scale up this work. So thanks everybody for listening tonight, and yeah, thanks Will for this partnership. Hopefully you liked all the pretty slides of that they produced of that site, and yeah, we look forward to hopefully seeing some of you out there next Thursday morning.
Fantastic. I absolutely love those plant layout diagram, and then the switch to the realization of that. That was really,
Yeah, I love that drawing too. It's like a work of art almost.
yeah,
I'll say I didn't draw it. A colleague of mine, Lauren Bergenholtz, drew it. I'll give her the credit because it
yeah.
is a
Well,
beautiful piece.
yeah, and then putting the slide, the realization in the same position afterwards. Very, very nicely done.
Thank you.
There are a couple of questions or comments that maybe you could respond to.
Definitely.
One is about the eucalyptus. I noticed we they're on the edge there. Are there any plans for them to be removed? I know they're acting as a windbreak, but since they are kind of disturbing your planted area, what's
Yeah, I can speak to that. So where are we? 2024. Yeah, I think it's been about 9 years since I came on the scene there officially, and 7 years or so of the construction. We have removed, the collective we, a huge number of eucalyptus trees for the stormwater garden, for example, for views, for rebuilding McCalla Road, hundreds of eucalyptus trees probably. So from an ecological restoration, so from a pure ecological restoration perspective, we've had no need to remove more eucalyptus trees because we've removed so many. We've created a huge disturbance on the landscape, and through the course of the other needs, we've created these habitat opportunities, such as a stormwater garden, as well as another site kind of in the middle of the island. So I have not advocated that we go out and do a whole nother round of eucalyptus removal because we've already removed so much, and we've got so much to do as a function of all these things that we've just created. So I'm not in a rush to go remove another dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen eucalyptus trees. And there'll still be probably some more eucalyptus removed for viewshed restoration on the part of the developer, I'm guessing. But regarding the ones along Treasure Island Road, my guess is we will get to those, before too long, within the next 5 years, because indeed they're just a source of uke seedlings in the stormwater garden. So yeah, that makes total sense to cut those down. And because we have great habitat right there on the west side of Treasure Island Road. We have other weeds, but we have 20 to 30 native plant species in that coastal scrub community there. So yeah, we'll definitely get to those, but sort of these stands that still remain of 100 or 400 trees, we're not going to go chipping away at those anytime soon. But yeah, when there's these smaller groves, such as that one that was pointed out by Bob, I'd say yeah, before too long.
Yeah, we understand it's super expensive dealing with this. I mean, we've looked at some just removing a few trees, and it's like, oh my gosh, the amount of eucalyptus here in San Francisco. It's like there's millions and millions of dollars worth of arbor work ahead, we hope. Eventually. But we like the successional planning idea. And you guys made a really nice dent and replacement there for sure.
So Vernon Smith asked about 5-petaled California poppies.
I think that was on your reimagining SF slide.
Oh.
I think it was commenting on these.
Oh.
We didn't go up with the design.
That's fun.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that. I see Bob's got a couple of questions. So he says, how did the oak woodland survive, and did the Navy ever have plans to destroy it? I mean, they destroyed a lot in the course of, in the same way in the Presidio or other military bases around the Bay, a lot of habitat was destroyed for military development, military needs. I mean, the oak woodlands really used to crown up and over the whole island.
Yeah.
There were thousands of individual oaks here at one time. So yeah, we're lucky with what we have to remain, but I don't think they did it on purpose. I think it was just this is in the way. And so there were actually quite a few oaks and hazelnuts and blue elderberry still within the military housing area. Unfortunately, a lot of those were removed. Some were removed and then saved, and then actually there's a couple in the stormwater garden which were transplanted back in and are surviving. But then a lot were just removed because they were in the way of the rebuilding of the housing area. But these large stands all around the perimeter of the island, those have survived, thank goodness. And then he says, is there any evidence left of Ohlone presence? So we were actually we had a meeting recently with the Ramaytush Ohlone and with the American Indian Cultural District. Our second meeting, we met with them in 2021, and then we finally got them out for a field trip recently. And in the process of preparing for that, we did some research into the development documents and the archaeological work that was done as part of all that. And it turns out there was a native village on the east side of the island. So, you know, in the logical location where it's, you know, more protected from the wind, and you know, on the bay side. So yeah, there was definitely whether it was Ohlone or Kosmiwak or whether it was a Ramaytush Ohlone. Yeah, I don't know if we know to that level of specificity, but it was definitely a Native American village.
They found artifacts.
I think they did. Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a stockpile. I don't know where it is, but yes.
If they was on the east side, they might have found it when they were doing the bridge work too, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah,
Neat.
cool. It's good to know.
And it was really interesting to see your using that steam method for removal of the oxalis. So that destroys the bulb. Is that the
Well, it doesn't destroy the bulb. So I'll start with talking about the propane torch, which I use on my own land, my own third of an acre here in San Anselmo. Although San Anselmo has passed an ordinance even stricter than San Francisco's, where no one can use landscape, you know, volatile fueled landscape equipment anymore in the town of San Anselmo. So that means technically I can't use my propane torch on oxalis anymore. But it's basically like an herbicide burn down, right? So you just get the above ground plant, but the bulb remains. Whereas with the steam, it seems that the water travels down the stem and does end up killing more of the plant. So it does seem logical that it would be more effective than the fire.
Right on. You've
Yeah.
got to have, I guess you have to have access to a water tank. So
Yeah, they have them on the back of the truck. It's a whole contraption that's actually a pretty expensive piece of machinery.
right, I know they've been using them over on Mount Sutro.
Yeah.
It's like a generator and a steam machine.
It's like a carpet cleaner, right?
Ah, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'd like to see it.
Yeah, well, you know, anything to get around the herbicide issue would be good. And if it's something as nice as hot water, you know,
Yeah.
that's a elegant solution if you can make it work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
We'd like to learn more about that if it proves effective.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you all so much for that. That was some really beautiful slides, and it was a luxury to the eyes to watch that.
Yeah.
Good. Well, yeah, and we
Yeah.
hope a fair amount of people come out for the tour next week. I'll say that, you know, we're in the summer, so a few of those slides were in the spring where the
What?
garden's really popping. It might not be quite, but you know, you can always come back. It's fun to
Yeah,
see it in
yeah.
all seasons. So,
No,
but yeah, I hope some
we're
more
all
people come out.
familiar.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's sort of a dormant season, but there's still
There are
stuff
things that
firing
bloom
off.
late.
Right. Yeah. There's
I
some
don't
There's
know.
some things
beauty
People
out
in
there.
most of the country, they have a 4-month, 5-month dormancy on their vegetation. For some reason, they come out here and they think it should be green and blossom all year round. I don't know. But I like the dormancy period as well. It's got its own beauty. Really good being with you all, and we'll see you. Well, we're definitely planning on checking it out next Thursday, so we'll see you over there.
All right. Well, thanks for having us. It was really
Thank
fun.
you.
And,
Yeah. Thanks everybody.
Thanks
yeah.
everybody
Thanks
for
everybody who
being
listened.
here. We
And
hope
thanks
see
to
you
everybody
next
who
month or
listens in the future.
Thursday.
All right.
Bye.
Adios.